talk was work by Joseph Cornell. And I think Cornell's work is incredibly compelling and really deserves much greater attention. And I'm absolutely thrilled that Erika Doss is here to discuss Cornell and many other things through the course of the conference. And her most recent book is Spiritual Moderns. And one of the things about that book is besides being wonderful, it's courageous because it explores something that we've previously shied away from, which is the exploration of spirituality and religion. But she may take slightly different tack this morning. So, Erika.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everybody, and thanks for being here at the 29th Annual American Art Conference of Initiatives in Art and Culture. I'd like to thank Lisa for inviting me to participate, and I'd like to thank Heritage Auctions for hosting this conference. I'd also really like to thank Heritage Auctions for hiring my recent graduate students at the University of Texas, yay, at Dallas, Sophia Penny, who will join Heritage next month at their headquarters in Dallas. So thank you. My talk today focuses on Joseph Cornell, really an ideal American artist to consider in terms of the theme of crafting the dream. Photographs of Cornell taken by photographers including Hans Nemeth, Wayne Michaels, capture him in a very dreamy state, even if that setting is just the backyard of his house in Flushing on a street named Utopia Parkway, or in an upstairs bedroom of that house. Likewise, Cornell's art, his shadow boxes, his collages, was very much focused on craft and construction, on assembling diverse materials to create things that evoked his dream state, his remembered experiences. Both Cornell's dreams and his craft, I argue, were modeled or shaped by two modern movements: Surrealism, which we've heard a little bit about and will continue to hear more about over the next couple of days, and Christian Science. Cornell's first modern art was collage, pictures made from other pictures cut out from 19th century books and journals. He started making collage after visiting Julian Levy's recently opened gallery, which Philip Johnson, Levy's classmate at Harvard, called, quote, a home for surrealism in America. Cornell was especially drawn to the works of Max Ernst, and in particular his collage novel, The Woman with 100 Heads, or also The Headless Woman, depending on how you want to translate that, from 1929. So a few weeks later, Cornell walks back into the gallery with a few of his own collages, including this one depicting a 19th century schooner with its main sail replaced by a gigantic rose, its pistils and petals, sexual parts of a flower, commandeered by a spider perched on an enormous web. Levy was impressed and included several of Cornell's collages in his January 1932 show on surrealism, which showcased all of the movement's major players and one of its eventual icons, Salvador Dali's Persistence of Memory. He also invited Cornell to design the show's announcement, this wonderfully offbeat image of a boy blowing the letters to the word surrealism. Cornell's first solo show at Levy's gallery featured bell jars, glass vitrines used in science experiments to create a vacuum. And he stuffed these with mannequin hands, dolls' heads, needles and thread, paper roses, mirrors, and wine glasses. In 1936, now also making shadow boxes, Cornell was included in the Museum of Modern Art's trailblazing 700-item exhibit, Fantastic Art, Dada, Surrealism. And it was here that he showed the first of his many soap bubble sets, including the first one that he sold to a public museum, the Wadsworth Atheneum, for $60 in 1938. Cornell's craftsmanship was noted. In the 1940s, Marcel Duchamp hired him to assemble some of his Boitem valises, those small, compact leather suitcases containing miniature reproductions of Duchamp's ready-mades and paintings. Later in his career, Cornell received solo shows at the Walker Art Center and at the Guggenheim. And more recently, the 2016 exhibit Joseph Cornell Wanderlust at the Royal Academy in London included more than 80 of his boxes, collages, assemblages, portfolios, and films. One highlight of that show was Medici's slot machine, an assemblage made in 1943 that sold for $7.8 million in 2014. Joseph Cornell lived in a modest house in Flushing, New York, with his mother and his younger brother. He had no formal art training. Yet he became an acclaimed American modern, exhibiting in the same galleries that represented Duchamp, Ernst, Dali, Frida Kahlo, Mina Loy, Man Ray, becoming a familiar presence in New York's surrealist art orbit, which is what Lee Miller profiled him as such in this 1933 photograph, posing Cornell with a toy sailboat featuring a disc of butterflies pinned to its mast and a mainsail made from a mane of long blonde hair. Cornell was a different kind of surrealist, however. He was a spiritual modern, an American artist whose materials and methods, subjects and styles were shaped and directed by his religious beliefs and religious experiences. Born in 1903, Cornell was the eldest of 4 children in an upper middle class household in Nyack, New York. His father was a business partner with a company that sold cotton and wool goods. He was also a successful designer of menswear textiles. When he died of leukemia in 1917, the family fell into dire financial straits. They downsized, moving to Queens, and in 1921, at the age of 17, Cornell became the family's primary breadwinner, working full-time as a salesman for William Whitman, a wholesale textile firm with offices in Manhattan. The photo on the right of salesmen attending a banquet in Boston, reproduced in an issue of Fiber and Fabric, the in-house organ of the American textile trade, shows the sort of men who were Joseph Cornell's peers. Needless to say, Joseph Cornell hated his job and was often sick with headaches, stomach aches, insomnia, depression. A co-worker encouraged him to seek relief in Christian Science, and in 1926, after having what he called a significant healing experience, Cornell joined the church. His commitment to Christian Science was considerable. Cornell attended weekly services, taught Sunday school classes, worked in Christian Science reading rooms, and distributed Christian Science literature in train stations. He tracked his religious activities and frequently referenced CS and its effects in his journals, noting both the powerful and prosaic terms of his faith, writing, for example, finished chores and rested in Grand Central waiting room until church time, elation at looking up at the celestial blue heavens and golden constellations on the ceiling, thought of the Milky Way, the stardust. Church service better than average, managed to stay awake most of the time. Mary Baker Eddy founded Christian Science after a near fatal fall on an icy sidewalk in Lynn, Massachusetts. Bedridden and in pain, her suffering unrelieved by medical treatment, Eddie turned to a passage in the Bible describing the healing miracles of Jesus Christ, an experience she later recounted a complete physical recovery and a profound sense of spiritual purpose, namely to pave, quote, the way of man's salvation from sickness and death by revealing the inherent spirituality of all existence. In 1875, she detailed her system of religious healing in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, the textbook of Christian Science. By 1898, it was in its 158th edition. One of few women to develop a major new religious movement in the modern era, Eddie's church was one of the most successful. And Cornell's conversion was typical. Christian Science's early ranks included thousands of aspirational businessmen, white-collar workers like Cornell, who suffered from various physical and psychic ailments. Focused on liberating the self from the corporeal bondage of disease and suffering and death, Christian Science offered relief. As opposed to scientific materialism, or the belief that reality is manifest in physical matter, Christian Science asserts that reality is constituted by divine mind, which is God or spirit, ever good, ever true. Matter, disease, and death are considered deviations from the perfection of divine mind and are hence illusory. There is no life, truth, intelligence, no substance in matter. Matter is mortal error. Spirit is the real and eternal. Matter is the unreal and temporal. Eddie declared in a scientific statement of belief that is a standard in Christian Science services. Divine science, she wrote, rising above physical theories, excludes matter, resolves things into thoughts, and replaces the objects of material sense with spiritual ideas. Through their religious practices, then, Christian scientists seek to filter or correct the imperfect and painful errors of matter to reach a state of spiritual reality or unfoldment, which Eddie described as boundless bliss. Cornell repeatedly references this affective state in his art, crafting his faith in projects that organize the sensual and profane world, the world of matter, into the conceptual and spiritual realm of Christian Science. The paradox of working with matter to confirm its unreality was not lost on him, of course, and mediated both the tenets and the tensions of his modern art. In a number of untitled pillboxes dating to the 1930s, for example, he replaced drugs, the bête noire of Eddie's metaphysics, with beads and sands and shells. In a series of pharmacies made in the 1940s, he filled glass apothecary jars with leaves, copper wire, gold leaf, butterfly wings, shells, colored sand, feathers, glass balls, wooden dolls, and lace. Identifying materia medica as incongruous tokens with no curative value, Cornell challenged the efficacy of traditional medicine and evoked Mary Baker Eddy's decree that Christian scientists, quote, abandon pharmaceutics and take up ontology, the science of real being. Likewise, in this book object of 1940, Cornell inserted a glass and metal coil on the page of a 19th century medical reference guide, and then glued together the rest of the book's pages, rendering the text unreadable. Here's another view of that particular object when it was examined for conservation. Fixing a new lens on this medical textbook, Cornell directed viewers to gaze into what he implied was the dark nothingness of medicine, thereby correcting the errors of mortal mind and the illusion of illness and disease. Cornell used books as sources, perhaps as containers, and I note that today stash books and book safes are incredibly popular. You probably know what I'm talking about. You can even watch a how to make a book safe tutorial on YouTube. Cornell was not interested, however, in hiding things, but in revealing spiritual reality. This 1948 assemblage in the Chicago Art Institute features 15 compartments, each housing a miniature jewelry box, papered with words and engravings cut from a 19th century book on fairy tales. The Joseph Cornell Study Center in the Smithsonian American Art Museum includes Cornell's library of several thousand books, part of his massive personal collection of all sorts of materials, including thousands of record albums, vintage films, letters, playbills, pamphlets, magazines, buttons, clay pipes, marbles, compasses, doll parts, seashells, driftwood, cordial glasses, ticket stubs. Cornell was what we might call a hoarder today, right? An inveterate collector of things. But Cornell ordered those things into what he called an archival mass. And he justified his collecting as a means of, quote, resolving the problem of matter on luminous and numinous terms. As he wrote in one journal entry, creative filing, creative arranging, as poetics, as technique, as joyous creation. He scoured mid-century Manhattan looking for stuff to use. Susan Sontag, who met Cornell in the mid-1960s, later recalled, he uses selected, sought-for, desired objects. He must have been clipping all the time. He must have been pouring through magazines and collecting things and haunting junk shops and flea markets, looking for the images that corresponded to his imagination. Likewise, his dreams. As Adam Gopnik writes, Cornell's boxes look like dreams to us, but the mind that made them was very wide awake. Indeed, Christian Science views dreams as the product of mind, and hence as potential sources of healing. Dreams reflect the spiritual progress of believers and even provide glimpses of spiritual truth. Cornell recorded his dreams and drew on their revelations in his art. If repeatedly described as a dream-driven artist, his dreams and his art were driven by the metaphysical tenets of Christian Science. Many of Cornell's personal books are marked cut on the inner sleeves, indicating his intention to cut them up or reuse them. He owned, for example, over 24 copies of the little book that you see on the upper left here, the volume that came out in 1951 called Stars. Does anybody remember these? The Golden series? I do. Obviously dates me. The Golden Guides, a series of books on nature and science. And he cut things out from these, including diagrams and charts that he used in collages like Americana, Natural Philosophy, or What Makes the Weather? This combines a portrait of a young boy painted by John Singleton Copley in 1771 with a color photograph of a rainbow arcing over Arizona's Monument Valley, a dove flying above the young boy's head, a diagram of the oscillating nature of the earth, and another of the, on the top left, titled How a Raindrop Refracts Sunlight. Pairing, in other words, symbols of science and spirit, the dove, the rainbow, Cornell expounded on his belief in the transient nature of matter. In this book object, he transformed a rather mundane French agricultural yearbook published in 1911 into a, quote, manual of marvels, featuring collages, cutouts, page inserts, altered text, and even origami. As Dick Rantashian has observed, Cornell's alterations overturned the book's original purpose. With its binding loosened and its pages thickened with inserts, the bulky volume was rendered fragile and futile as a reference guide. Books were among the many vernacular objects, everyday objects, irons, urinals, teacups, that interwar surrealists experimented with as they challenged the conventions of art making, the art market, and modernism itself. Cornell's book projects, however, were not just alterations, but were corrections, a conceptual and creative art practice based on his religious beliefs. Throughout his career, Cornell worked to reveal what he called the metaphysics of ephemera, a phrase he often cited in his journals to evoke the transcendent possibilities of the banal. In the later 1940s, he began making sandboxes and sand fountains, shallow, rectangular boxes, glass-fronted containers filled with colored sand, shells, driftwood, bells, metal rings, other objects. He designed these to be handled, their contents shaken up and then resettled into different patterns, sort of like that Etch-a-Sketch that we all had, which was invented in the late 1950s. Constantly shifting in appearance, the internal instability of his sandboxes corroborated his belief that matter perceived by mortal mind was inherently insubstantial, unreal, and temporal, in Eddie's words. Religious thoughts and religious themes steered Cornell's modern art. His repeated references to the force of wind, the breezy currents powering the spiderweb mainsail in this 1931 collage, the young boy's breath expelling the word surrealism in his 1932 show announcement, the bubbles of amoeba, fossil foraminifera, and crystalline forms being blown from the clay pipe that we see here in this 1939 soap bubble set. All of this alludes to the transformative power of divine spirit. In the Bible, wind is a common metaphor for spirit or the actions of God. Likewise, Mary Baker Eddy described wind as, quote, God's spiritual government, encompassing all things. The English word spirit is derived from the Latin spiritus, meaning breath. Originating in his religious beliefs, Cornell's recurrent attention to wind and its effects in his collages and shadow boxes was driven, I think, by his interest in symbolizing spirit in everyday life. Even playful pieces like Belle Echo Gruyere, which roughly translates into the nonsensical phrase, the beautiful sounds of cheese, signal Cornell's metaphysical interest. This tiny assemblage, about 3 by 7 inches, consists of a small circular box whose lid is decorated with a picture of a dairy cow. Papered inside with a map of Switzerland, the box features a foil-covered triangle, a shape imitating a wedge of that cheese, Gruyere, named after the town in the Swiss Alps where it's made. Resting on a bed of faux straw, shredded paper, the cheese triangle is wrapped with a cord whose tag and end features suggest another dairy cow. The triangle is actually a cow in the can noisemaker, a common toy that started to be marketed in the 1920s that moos when turned upside down. You all know what I'm talking about. If aligned with the surrealist trope of confounding visual expectations, this is not a cheese. Cornell's assemblage is further informed by his religious belief that mortal perceptions, including sound, are fundamentally illusory. This is not a cow. As a modern artist who was Christian Science, Cornell had to reckon with his religion's decree that matter is illusory, and the only true reality is spirit. He responded to this religious credo by making art that focused on the life of spirit and stressed the error of matter. However dense the materiality of his art, and it is dense, Cornell's subject was spirit. Aesthetic interest in representation, in depicting real world, real time things, places, people, events, or in biography, in reflecting on the nature of the self. All of this was superseded by the conceptual idea of a spiritually informed modern American art unburdened by corporeality. Cornell approached this ideal by engaging modern art practices that disrupted and undermined the materiality or materiality in general in order to establish new realities in material practices such as collage and assemblage. As he wrote in one journal entry, collage equals life, an epithet that I think neatly summarizes his spiritual modernism. Described as the 20th century's most revolutionary formal innovation in artistic representation, collage was the stylistic hallmark of both visual and literary moderns, from Picasso to William Carlos Williams. Challenging conventional notions of originality, authorship, beauty, and permanence, avant-garde painters and poets alike employed collage and its cut and paste sensibilities to rearrange and represent the forms, the images and objects of the known world in alternative ways. Cornell's collages of the early 1930s purposely corrected images appropriated from other sources to conform to Christian Science's metaphysical logic. In his announcement that he designed for Levy in 1932, he modified an illustration of a young boy shooting darts from a blowpipe, with that same boy expelling the word surrealism through what looks to be a pastry icing bag, thus substituting, as per Eddy, the object's material sense with spiritual ideas. Cornell appropriated this image from a 19th century children's book on science experiments and magic tricks illustrated by the French engraver Louis Poyet. Likewise, in this untitled collage of a man scrutinizing a spinning coin, Cornell corrected Poyet's picture to show the man wearing a colander on his head, suggesting then the holes inherent in the preoccupation of mortal mind with matter and material things like money. Cornell's goal, he told Julian Levy, and reiterated in his personal writing, was to make a modern art of white magic. As he explained to Museum of Modern Art curator Alfred Barr in 1936 when he was organizing the Fantastic Art exhibit, I do not share in the subconscious and dream theories of the surrealist. I believe that surrealism has healthier possibilities than have been developed. Cornell's use of the word healthier was intentionally self-revealing. He was pointedly alerting Barr that his version of surrealism was based on the curative, restorative, healing directives of Christian Science. Cornell was not the only American modern whose art was guided by his personal religious beliefs. His interest in a healthier kind of surrealism was shared by Mina Loy, an avant-garde poet and artist, as we've heard, and also Julian Levy's mother-in-law for a period of time, who converted to Christian Science in 1909 and became one of Cornell's most valued intimates and a modernist role model. If mostly known today, I think, for her literary modernism and several lines in her poem on the right, There Is No Life or Death, which was published in Camerawork in 1914, reveal her grasp of Christian Science. Loy was also an artist and produced a substantial body of drawings, paintings, commercial work, collages, and sculptures during a long period of time. Living in Paris in the 1920s, she designed lampshades and sconces in a studio financed at first by Peggy Guggenheim. She scouted for artists for Levy's New York Gallery, and she scoured the city's flea markets for items that she and Cornell would eventually use in their art projects. And as we know, in 1933, several of her paintings were exhibited in a solo exhibit at Levy's gallery. In addition to sharing mixed media sensibilities, Mina Loy and Joseph Cornell exchanged letters, gifts, and coded Christian Science insights about modern art. In 1946, for example, Cornell confided to Loy, "My science and healthy thoughts about the unconscious and surrealism give me extraordinary emotion." In 1950, inspired by an exhibit of Cornell's aviaries, which we see an example of here, Loy wrote an essay praising his defiance of surrealism's, quote, ingenuity of evil, explaining Joseph Cornell, while theoretically adhering to surrealist formula, alone has raised it above reality. Mina Loy sought to do the same in paintings depicting ethereal beings floating in blue cloudscapes, their hands raised up in gestures of awe and gratitude. Years after seeing them in Levy's gallery in 1933, Cornell reminisced with Loy about the indelible impressions of the sky blue of your paintings. He appropriated their azure palette in several pieces dating to the late 1930s, including these two daguerreotype objects featuring photographs of Loy floating in glittering fields of glass shards, alluding to the ephemerality of matter and their mutual faith in an alternate reality of spirit. Cornell reworked found materials into the context of his religious beliefs. Cornell's mediation on materiality resonated with multiple American moderns in the post-war era, including Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, Robert Motherwell, Bruce Conner, and Jean Conner. I'd like to reference two other American moderns who similarly crafted the dream in collage and assemblage projects, repurposing found materials to work through particular matters of personal trauma and personal belief. Annalate Baron, for example, a German Jewish refugee whose family immigrated to New York in 1941, channeled experiences of vulnerability and persecution, loss and anguish into mixed media collages scratched with letters and shapes, and box-like assemblages made of distressed wood and wire, featuring numbers, blocks, the Star of David. Reviewers of a recent show of her work at the Michael Rosenfeld Gallery remarked on their similarities with Joseph Cornell, but also their sharp differences. Cornell, Lyle Rexer writes at the Brooklyn Rail, precisely congregated memory, dream, and desire in chapels of metaphoric splendor, whereas Barron shored up ruins against loss and annulment. Further scholarship might focus on the links between Barron's material choices and her religious beliefs, including what ruin means in the history of Judaica. I'd like to close with James McGee, an enigmatic artist who died last fall. McGee spent the last 40 years of his life in West Texas, 75 miles from El Paso, working on The Hill, a complex of stone buildings housing massive sculptures made from found and ruined materials. Steel and iron triptychs on huge ball bearings, studies in rust and decay and debris, acid and honey, beeswax and burnt rubber, paprika and cold-rolled steel, barbed wire and pig bone. Supported in part by his alter ego, Annabelle Livermore, who painted popular surrealist scenes of Texas landscapes. Laura Bush owns several of them. And this is a whole nother story to the James McGee story. McGee's bulky assemblages are, one writer asserts, like a giant Joseph Cornell box crossed with an altarpiece, Crucifixion by Matthias Grunewald. McGee saw the hill on larger religious terms as a spiritual ornament, as he said, laid out in the form of a cross and configured with doors opening up into doors opening up into doors opening up into doors, all reflecting his experiences with Catholic, Cistercian, and Quaker belief systems, and his aim of creating a space of spiritual refuge for himself and for others. This brief overview of his work suggests fruitful possibilities of critical inquiry informed by material meaning, craft, and spiritual resonance in modern American art. Thank you. Okay. Are there any questions? Yes.
Hold up. "1967, American Sculpture of the 60s.
I can't hear you, sir.
In 1967, the show American Sculpture of the 60s.
Hmm.
The most expensive sculpture show, I believe, of the 20th century. Most artists had 1, 2, maybe 3 pieces, and they were very, very large. I think Cornell showed 12
I think
or
he showed the
13.
most in the show.
Oh, yeah, 12 or 13.
Like 85 or something.
So was there some relationship with Maurice Tuckman, the
Oh, I'm
curator
sh-
of the exhibition, or do you know how that happened? Because
I don't know the specifics on the show, but I do know that, sure, it definitely was related to Tuckman's interest in Cornell's spiritual modernism, as I call it. But I also think he wanted to make a sort of a big show out of all of those pieces. It was also quite significant even getting them together, since Cornell was notorious about not letting go. And that's a whole nother story as well. So, but that's a great observation. Thank you. Any other comments, questions, fascination with Joseph Cornell? Okay. Thank you.
One more. Okay.
I thought what you showed us was extraordinary, and the range and the breadth and the depth. And I'm not following the art world quite like I used to years ago, but I'm not seeing any of this or not hearing it. And I wonder,
Can you speak up, please?
Oh, okay, I'll try. I thought what you showed us was really extraordinary.
Thank you.
It's great art. Is this really shown to the public, or is it in a very narrow niche area that, let's say, you're talking about the shows that have come? You don't see this here in New York. You don't hear about him here in New York. At least I don't.
We don't hear about what?
Cornell.
Cornell.
And even
There's lots
McGee,
of Cornell in New York.
You know, the stuff that McGee is doing is like, oh my God, this is fantastic.
This guy's amazing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted, in the spirit of the theme of this year's conference, I wanted to talk about other artists besides Cornell. And he's right up there. And I think that the James McGee Foundation will hopefully invite people to come and visit. It is definitely worth visiting. It's about 75 miles from El Paso. And when he died, it sort of ended. So they have to figure out, what are we going to do now? To open up the space requires a lot of people. As you can see, these are really bulky, big, but it is very much about being in a kind of space where I have heard so many people say, I have not had the luxury of being there myself. I burst into tears. I was overcome by emotion, a really powerful sort of affective space. And that's
but you're talking about, you know, you're saying come and visit.
right.
There are many of us here in New York. There are lots of places around that we have to go to a specific place to see his work. Is there a way
To see McGee's work?
Is his being so that it can be seen and aware of, rather than people having to make a trip there?
Yeah,
Because how many people are going to make a trip there?
Well, you know,
It's
Spiral
gonna be
Jetty
very
does get
narrow.
3,000 people a year, so I'm not sure, but I know that McGee does have studio work, and Annabelle Livermore certainly has a presence in the art world. So, but anyhow, thank you.
Sorry, brief last question. That was a fantastic talk. Something that comes across in a lot of his art is just this great sense of whimsy. And I'm curious whether you have a sense of like his personality, like whether he was similarly whimsical in his personality or whether there was melancholy, or I'm just curious about that.
That's a good question. I never met Cornell. There's some great biographies out there, Deborah Solomon, et cetera. I gotta believe that when you're a kid and your dad dies of leukemia and you're 14 years old and 3 years later your mom is making you become the breadwinner for a family of 4, his younger brother was disabled, this is pressure. And he didn't know how to talk about it. So he turned to Christian Science and he talked about how it was a relief, but he couldn't get a handle on his own why I need relief. He couldn't name his illness. I think that's fairly common until, the therapeutic ethos comes in a little bit stronger in the end of the 20th century. People say he was funny, witty, incredibly well read, smart, could read French. He and Duchamp met in 1933 at an opening of Brancusi's work, and they're going on and on about Paris for hours. It's only at the end of the conversation that Duchamp realizes, oh, this guy's never left Flushing. He's never been out of New York. He's never been to Paris. He had an incredible memory based on reading of Paris, monuments and streets and stuff like that. So I think it was an autodidact in a lot of ways. And whimsy is definitely a way that I think a lot of people approach him. Thanks. Lisa.
Symptoms and been unable to identify his problem in another gender, he might have been called neurasthenic.
Absolutely.
But the other one is a question, which is, what about other artists working in modern idioms, if you will, who were working with varied media, such as, for example, Dove and the constructions?
Yeah, there's been some great work out on Dove, who doesn't exactly commit to any particular religious belief system, but is definitely interested in mixed media. One thing I thought was so great about Marie's talk was we don't talk about all these women artists, but they're obviously out there. And one thing we don't talk about enough in American art either is mixed media. Everybody gets sort of pigeonholed into, oh, he's a painter, she was a sculptor. And I think the fact of the matter is everybody's broke. Everybody's sort of scrounging for material to work in. And Dove especially is working with a variety of media, a variety of materials. Now, does that have to do with what's at hand or what he's aspiring to? I think it's sort of a combination of both.
Yeah, well, the synergy,
Yeah,
surely. But I mean, I think crossing media is something that's really important and that we don't do enough of.
I agree. So, yeah. Thank you.